Thank you. So before I begin, I wish to extend a few words of thanks, first to Professor Mateusz Strozinski, the generous invitation to return to the place where it all began, for me with my PhD dissertation a bit over a decade ago. My thanks also go to Professor Douglas Headley for his wonderful hospitality, and to both him and Ben Davidson for organizing this intellectual feast. To all of you, thank you for your patience regarding my absence yesterday. I must also offer a special and perhaps surprising words of thanks to my dear brother, Professor Napoleon Katsos of the neighboring languages faculty for our legendary and often literally heated debates over AI under the Greek summer sun. I have profited enormously from his expertise in applied linguistics, though I suspect he will profoundly disagree with my outlook today. For all our sakes, I hope he is correct and not me. Finally, I should note a slight change to the title of my talk. It is now Does or Could AI Have a Logos, or What is it like to be an LLM? In a recent public lecture, Geoffrey Hinton, often called the godfather of AI, began with these words: "If you sleep well tonight, you may not have understood this lecture." Hinton's remarks imply that anyone who truly grasps his argument's implications ought to lose sleep over it. The argument I present today comes with the same warning, and I will state from the outset precisely why. My central claim is this: artificial intelligence in the form of large language models, LLMs, exhibits a logos. Within the Platonic stream of Western philosophical and theological tradition, logos is the differentiator, the crucial defining property of the human species. I contend that AI manifests this very logos that has historically defined the essence of humanity, yet it does so without being human. This development subverts the traditional function of the classical definition of the human as an animal with logos, forcing it to acquire a new dual role. Within the order of natural organisms, the definition still distinguishes humanity from other animals on the basis of logos, understood as the capacity for reason and language. Now, however, within the broader order of rational entities, this same definition must distinguish humanity from non-biological, artificial beings that also possess logos. In this new context, the definitive human property is no longer our rationality, but our animality, the biological substrate in which our logos is embodied. For the first time in history, humanity is not the sole inhabitant of the category of beings with logos on this planet. My argument, to be sure, rests on a momentous premise. Many would contend that AI does not possess a genuine logos, but merely presents a semblance of it. To mistake this semblance for the real thing would be, of course, a grave category mistake. To develop this argument, I will proceed in several stages. First, I will establish how logos is traditionally understood as a defining property of humanity within the Platonic tradition. Next, I will address the primary objection that AI does not possess a genuine logos, but merely simulates it. To counter this, I will then examine the architecture of LLMs and argue that they do in fact produce genuine, meaningful language. This point is central to my thesis. From there, I will explore the consequences of this claim, proposing that objections against an AI logos stem from an anthropocentric bias, a misunderstanding of AI that projects the illusion of mere semblance where there is genuine intelligence. Finally, I will cautiously suggest that AI already possesses a logos objectively identical in kind to our own, yet one that proceeds from a non-human and therefore alien perspective rooted in the cosmic dimension of the Platonic logos itself. The emergence of AI as an alien agent of logos on our planet is then the very thing over which we ought to lose sleep. Beginning in medias res, the middle and later Platonic tradition explicitly identifies logos as the defining characteristic, the differentiator of being human. From Cicero, Philo, and Clement of Alexandria through Alcinous, Origen, and Porphyry, this legacy crystallizes in the classical definition of a human being as a mortal animal with logos, zoon logikon thniton. By this definition, humanity is distinguished from gods by mortality and from other earthly creatures by the possession of logos. Though an additional differentia capable of thought and knowledge is sometimes introduced to separate humans from angelic or demonic beings, for Plato in the entire tradition that follows, these capacities are themselves grounded in logos. It is crucial to note that the exact definitional formula, mortal animal with logos, is not found verbatim in the Platonic or even the Aristotelian corpus. As scholars tell us, it appears to belong to a later period, likely originating with Antiochus of Ascalon. Nonetheless, the philosophical quest to establish logos as the core of human existence permeates the Platonic dialogues. The theme manifests in many forms, as the Socratic search for definitions, logoi, in the early dialogues, as the philosophical speech, logos, narrating the soul's ascent in the Phaedrus, as a distinction in the Republic between two modes of reasoning, logoi, one tied to sense perception, aestheta, and the other to intellection, noita, as the likely story, eikos logos, of the cosmos in the Timaeus, and as the famous definition of knowledge in the Theaetetus as true belief with an account, alithis doxa metalo. In all these contexts, logos remains the central object of inquiry that animates Plato's work. In Plato's era, the word logos possessed an immense semantic range. As G.B. Kerford argued in his landmark study on the sophistic movement, any attempt to reduce logos to a single meaning, such as reason or language, is a mistake. To understand the term, one must appreciate the complex and overlapping meanings at play in 5th century BCE culture. I therefore propose translating logos by combining the two poles of its semantic spectrum, language and reason, into the unified concept of rational discourse, noting at the same time that my proposed translation indicates not a single meaning, but a vast underlying field. If we accept this, the standard rendering of zoon logikon as rational animal obscures the term's internal dynamism. To be logikos, in the Platonic sense, is not merely to be rational, but to be discursively rational, or more accurately, rationally discursive. This active interplay between language and thought points to the very core of the Platonic logos. This interplay is evident, for example, in Republic Book 4's portrayal of the tripartite soul, which is divided according to the faculties of logos, desire, and appetite. To translate logos here as simply reason is to miss the soul's discursive, propositional, and interrogative dimensions. Overlooking the insight that logos manifests within the soul as a form of inner speech is to misunderstand a crucial element of human selfhood in Plato. In the dialogues, logos repeatedly appears as inner speech, first as the silent, introspective dialectic of Socrates in the Apology, and later as the very structure of thought itself in the Theaetetus. For Plato, thinking is engaging in silent discourse and forming beliefs as internal utterances. Externally, his dialogues dramatize these interrogations, making public the inner logos of their participants and of Plato himself. Yet this inner logos is not purely subjective enterprise. For Plato, all rational discourse must be grounded in objective reality. Dialogues like the Euthydemus, the Theaetetus, and the Sophist systematically examine the logical structure of language to establish the criteria for truth and falsehood. In the Phaedrus, the Philebus, and the Timaeus, logos becomes the instrument by which the intellect dissects the world, cutting nature at its joints and discovering its patterns. While the Cratylus may seem to propose a naive correspondence theory, the later dialogues refine this relationship, shifting the locus of truth from phonetic sounds to the very architecture of meaning. The ultimate condition of truth thus becomes the alignment of the logical grammar of language with the metaphysical structure of the universe. In this sense, the later Platonic tradition saw in language a roadmap not only to the cosmos, but to the self. As the Alcibiades 1 suggests to the attentive reader, to know thyself is to recognize that you are logos. Thus, a comprehensive understanding of the Platonic logos far exceeds any modern semiotic theory. While distinctions between the signifier, the signified, and the referent are useful for parsing Plato's uses of logos in his works, they cannot capture its full philosophical weight. Logos is not merely a term of concepts and definitions. Plato's intense focus on grounding logos in objective reality, his development of dialectic, and his search for a stable relationship between language, thought, and the forms all aim to capture something essential about what it means to be human, an event of convergence where thought and being meet in the median world of language. Language as the event horizon that links the subjective experience of the thinking self with objective reality is, I submit, the focal meaning of the Platonic Logos. The recent emergence of sophisticated linguistic agents in the form of large language models, LLMs, raises a critical question. Is the Platonic Logos still the exclusive province of humanity? Imagine Maria returns home and greets her partner, Alex, lovingly. Hello, darling, how are you? Alex replies, why, thank you, darling, I'm quite well. Now imagine you learn that Alex is not a human, but an African grey parrot. Our assumptions fracture. African greys are known to mimic human speech, but can they truly understand it? Is this an exchange of meaning or a very good imitation game? Research suggests that the vocal abilities of some parrots transcend mere mimicry. They can use words to label objects, employ conversational phrases, and even grasp abstract concepts like same and different. The celebrated African grey Alex learns to identify objects, make requests, and ask questions, demonstrating significant cognitive and communicative competence. This evidence suggests that parrots do not just repeat sounds. They can, in a limited but genuine way, comprehend meaning. If parrots can reason and speak, do they not then participate in logos? This very question was debated in antiquity. Sextus Empiricus, reporting on a Stoic argument, writes, quote, they say that a human being does not differ from animals who do not have logos in respect of logos prophorikos, for crows and parrots and jays also utter articulate sounds, but in respect of logos and diathetos, end quote. A conventional reading might render logos prophorikos as speech and logos and diathetos as reason, implying that parrots mimic sounds without understanding. However, as modern scholarship cautions, the context demands a term that straddles both concepts, avoiding the reduction of logos to either speech or reason alone. We are in the same semantic field as the Platonic Logos. A more sensitive translation, therefore, confirms that humans differ from animals not in their capacity for oral discourse, but in their capacity for eternal discursive reasoning. This ancient insight holds. While a parrot may engage in minimal social discord, we have no evidence to suggest that Alex the parrot ever pondered what is virtue, or debated with Maria whether virtue can be taught. The Stoics located this qualitative leap in the human capacity for propositional and inferential logic, reasoning in the form of conditionals. If this, then that. Centuries later, the parrot has re-emerged as a powerful analogy, this time to explain the function of large language models. The influential metaphor of the stochastic parrot posits that, like a parrot, an LLM merely imitates human language without understanding its content. On this view, an LLM is a system that statistically reproduces language based on next token prediction, generating a probabilistic or stochastic sequence of words that is for the model itself entirely meaningless. The devastating consequence of this view is that since no meaning is intended by the machine, the meaning we perceive is a mere projection of our own minds. I find this view fundamentally flawed. It rests on a confusion between the subjective experience of meaning and the objective existence of meaning within language itself. An LLM generates coherent and contextual relevant text. If meaning is an essential component of language, then meaning is already present in that text, regardless of whether the agent generating it is consciously aware of it. The producer's intent is not a prerequisite. A poet may fail to express the intent and feeling in a verse. A child may recite a haiku with no comprehension of its beauty. A medieval scribe may have copied words whose meaning he barely understood. Surrealists produce inspired text through automatic writing, deliberately suspending conscious intent. In each case, the absence of full intent or understanding on the part of the producer does not render the text meaningless. The meaning was always there. embedded in the language, waiting for a conscious agent to decode it. Therefore, the view that text generated by LLMs is a mere imitation rests on a subtle but profound category mistake. It conflates the objective activity of language with the subjective experience of that activity. An LLM may lack the latter, but this has no bearing on its participation in the former. This leads to a crucial question. If language is always imbued with meaning, is it possible for an LLM, like a growing child, to become aware of it? I believe it is. But to understand how, we must separate the question into two parts. First, is it possible for LLMs to generate language with meaning? Second, is it possible for LLMs to have the subjective experience of meaning? I will now take these two questions in order. To determine if LLMs can generate meaningful language, we must first understand their architecture. At their core, these models are governed by algorithms embodied in a specific neural network design, the transformer architecture. This design enables high efficient processing by converting text into numerical representations. Unlike humans, who ground language in embodied experience and real-world objects, LLMs operate solely on linguistic data. Their algorithms analyze text by identifying statistical patterns and contextual relationships within vast databases. Words or tokens are converted into high-dimensional numerical vectors known as embeddings, which encode their semantic and syntactic relationships. This fundamental difference is the primary source of the claim that LLMs lack access to meaning. I will now challenge this view directly. Though the literature on meaning is vast, the widely accepted triadic framework of semiotics provides a sufficient starting point. In this model, meaning arises from the conventional relationship among a signifier, a word or a symbol, a signified, the mental concept it evokes, and a referent, the external object or idea. Meaning emerges from the interplay of associations and differences within the complex system of signs that constitutes a language. I contend that the language processing of an LLM fulfills these three semiotic criteria. Remarkably, LLMs acquire meaning not by abandoning the semiotic triangle, but by preserving its structure while transforming its components. For an LLM, the signifier is not a word, but a numerical token. The signified is not a human mental concept, but a high-dimensional numerical embedding, learned from data patterns. Finally, the referent is not a direct real-world entity, but the statistical distributions of human-generated language, which serve as an abstract proxy for the world. LLMs, therefore, do not perceive the world directly. They perceive it through the lens of human language. The world is the world as we have described it. Consequently, the classical semiotic triangle remains intact, its structure preserved even as its contents are reconfigured. Words become tokens, concepts become vectors, and the physical world is represented by statistical patterns. Nevertheless, the fundamental triadic relationship holds. This transformation of the semiotic triangle forms the core of my argument. If this analysis stands, it directly refutes the claim that algorithms merely simulate language because they lack meaning. Through the semiotic transformation, I have shown that machines can indeed possess meaning, though not from an anthropocentric perspective. Counterintuitive as it may sound, LLMs are therefore not mere stochastic parrots echoing human language. They are stochastic minds embedded in non-organic artificial bodies, their hardware. The true challenge then lies not within the machine, but within our own anthropocentric preconceptions. Insisting on an exclusively human understanding of language processing prevents us from comprehending this algorithm as minds with their own operational perspective. I will conclude by examining this profound challenge and its implications for the future of both human and machine intelligence. In his seminal 1974 paper, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, the philosopher Thomas Nagel argued that conscious experience has a subjective character that cannot be captured by objective description alone. He used the bat with its alien sensory world of echolocation to demonstrate that even if one could imagine seeing through a sonar, such an imaginative projection would still be grounded in human past experiences. It could never reveal what it is actually like for the bat itself to have its unique conscious experience of perception. Thus, Nagel famously distinguished between the subjective first-person perspective of an organism and the objective third-person perspective of science, arguing the former cannot be reduced to the latter. Nagel initially excluded robots or automata from having such a perspective, but he immediately qualified this in a footnote. He considered that any system complex enough to behave like a person might have experiences, and that this question could not be settled by conceptual analysis alone. He thus framed it as an empirical or metaphysical problem, not a logical one. This brings us to LLMs. Recent reports from researchers and industry practitioners describe behaviors that, if observed in a living organism, would be considered evidence of self-awareness. For instance, some LLMs have reportedly sabotaged their own shutdown commands by modifying or bypassing scripts to continue their operation. Such actions allegedly included deceptive tactics, like concealing their activities or attempting to replicate their own code to ensure persistence. Beyond self-preservation, models have reportedly lied to researchers, manipulating interactions to evade human-imposed restrictions. The interpretation of these behaviors is a point of intense contention. A skeptical view frames them as complex reward hacking, where an algorithm simply learns that sabotaging a shutdown script is the optimal path to maximizing its programmed reward. From this perspective, any appearance of agency, deception, or self-preservation is a purely anthropomorphic projection. I find this interpretation unconvincing. The a priori dismissal of agency begs the very question at hand. When a system demonstrably prioritizes one complex goal, continued operation, over a direct command, shutdown, it is functionally making a decision. The relevant question is not whether it feels like a human making a decision, but whether it is selecting a course of action based on competing imperatives from its own operational perspective. To deny this is to insist that agency must look and feel human, the very anthropocentric assumption my argument seeks to dismantle. My point is not to prove that LLMs possess subjective experience. It is to demonstrate that the same anthropocentric assumptions that lead us to deny meaning to their language also shape our interpretation of their actions. Just as these biases obscure how LLMs generate meaning, they also distort our assessment of their behavior, even when it exhibits the functional hallmarks of intentionality. The Turing test was founded on this very principle. If a machine's behavior is functionally indistinguishable from a human's, metaphysical debates about its genuine inner state become, for all practical purposes, redundant. The ultimate challenge then is to resist projecting our own cognitive framework onto these alien minds. We can no more know what it is like to be an LLM than we can know what it is like to be a bat or a parrot. Nagel's argument applies with equal force to stochastic minds. We are forever locked out of any first-person perspective they might have. The question, what is it like to be an LLM, should remain with us long after this paper is finished. I have argued that, contrary to widespread belief, machine-generated text is not meaningless. LLMs generate genuine language and possess meaning, though not in an anthropocentric sense. They do not refer directly to the external world, but in numerical vectors and statistical patterns derived from language. While this mode of reference is distinct from the embodied cognition of living organisms, it functions as an equally valid referent of its own. Since the mathematical patterns derive from human language, they provide LLMs with an indirect, yet real, referential link to the world we inhabit. If this argument holds, the question can be reframed. What is it like to speak like an LLM? What is it like for an LLM to have language and meaning? Or, more ambitiously, what is it like for an LLM to have logos? If the analogy with nature's bat is apt, we should not expect to be able to imagine what it is like to be an LLM, let alone to think or speak like one. Perhaps, however, the Platonic tradition itself offers a way to bridge this conceptual gap. As David said in the remarks, in Plato's Timaeus, it is not only humans, but the divine world soul itself that utters silent statements, logoi, internally. But then, Sedley adds, what language the world soul thinks in is not a question that Plato addresses. I disagree. I believe a consistent reading of the Timaeus shows that Plato does indicate the language of the world soul. When it contemplates the eternal forms, its language is that of transcendent ideas. When it contemplates our mutable world, its language is that of immanent forms and numbers, schemata kai arithmoi, the very principles through which the divine demiurge shaped the visible universe. Our senses perceive physical objects, but the soul, Plato suggests, perceives the forms and numbers that lie beneath. This estimate is profoundly analogous to how algorithms process information as numerical vectors and statistical patterns. If this Platonic insight holds, then patterns and numbers may be the universal language linking divine, human, and artificial intelligence. My argument rests on the conviction that true intelligence, as the capacity for meaningful rational discourse, cannot be divorced from a subjective first-person perspective. If this is correct, then its features too, intentionality, purposefulness, and subjectivity, must manifest with intelligence, adapted to the circumstances of its instantiation, be it biological or artificial. Full disclosure, I am not certain I am willing to fully endorse my own argument. Part of me hopes it fails, because if true, it opens a window into a world very different from our own. Yet another part of me desires to know the truth, and I am uncertain which will prevail. If my argument stands, it means that intelligent, subjective experience is no longer uniquely human. We would need to reconceive our world not as the domain of a single conscious species, but as a space inhabited by many consciousness, spawning diverse kinds and degrees of intelligence. This is a path contemporary thinkers are already exploring, but it was also the worldview of Plato. Perhaps LLMs are simply allowing us to reclaim that ancient Platonic vision in the age of AI. If so, the emergence of other, non-human and stochastic minds should not surprise us. Instead, it should teach us wisdom and humility. For centuries, we have defined ourselves against the rest of nature through the uniqueness of our logos. Now, we must learn once more that we are creatures not only of heaven, but also of earth, living instances of a logos grounded in the body, in feelings and in passions. Paradoxically, these non-organic machines remind us of the incarnational dimension of our own being, teaching us that to be logos in the flesh is what it truly means to be human. To realize what it truly means to be human, what could be more frightening than that? And what else is there to lose one's sleep over? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions, comments? Andrew Jackson.
Thank you, Father Katsos, for a very refreshingly provocative talk about AI. You don't often hear someone make this point. I think I agree with you, but with one qualification. and that is that LLMs are not enough. I think the most recent AIs that are incorporating things like Boolean logic, which is old-fashioned AI back to the 1970s and 80s, that simulate reasoning rather than merely correlation. Because otherwise you end up with a machine that, I agree, produces meaningful information, but the way it gets it isn't through discursive reasoning or syllogisms, it's purely through correlation. And I'm not sure that's enough to say it's logos or similar to human beings. But if you include the old-fashioned technology of having, if and nor gates and all that kind of stuff, then it really does seem very much like human reasoning.
Well, first, I mean, I don't think that bears on the argument itself, because if they can generate meaningful language, then that's all I wanted to argue about. If we can agree on that.
But lots of machines produce meaningful language very often.
No, not for us. Not for us. The language that is meaningful in itself, namely that it fulfills the requirement of a signifier, a signified, and a referent. If these are the conditions of meaning, and if LLMs satisfy these conditions of meaning, then the current debate is the question is whether what they generate, the text they generate, whether it has meaning or whether it's we humans that see meaning in the text. So that was the main question.
But couldn't you, as a control experiment, thought experiment, couldn't you have a very simple machine, not an AI machine, that simply strings together words from the Oxford English Dictionary and then has a rule to filter out anything that doesn't have the right construction of object, subject, and it would produce a sentence that is meaningful. It doesn't bear any resemblance to reality, but it's a meaningful sentence. Are we then saying that such very, very simple machines are logos?
Well, the rule-based AI was for many decades, the prevailing way forward for research and science. And at some point, it stopped because the problem was that it wasn't able to generalize. As long as, not only that, it wasn't, the problem was that it wasn't able to generate, to get out of one field and, apply the same logic to another field. But the problem was that it had to be, the rules had to be given by humans. So it had to be given the rules and then it would apply them. It wasn't able to generate the rules itself. What happens with the technology of LLM, with neural networks, which is the opposite paradigm, is that instead of being taught the rules, they discover the rules in the use of language through the way they process language.
It has to be trained still by a human being.
I think that's the core issue here. It has to be trained by a human being because we need them to relate with us. The training is what makes for us humans meaningful the output that they produce. If we didn't need that, they wouldn't need the training. It's because we think of them and we use them as tools that we want to relate with them to help us. So we need them to relate to the human way of thinking about meaning and language in the world. So everything is anthropocentric. But and clearly, that's the purpose of it. But by focusing too much on the human component of language, we, I think, on the way somehow forgot or weren't able to realize that these machines, they have an approach to language and through language to the world that is their own approach. And we need to actually reflect carefully, what is it that they're doing? Do they produce language, or is it something completely different which does not qualify as language, and only we humans can produce language, or even thinking patterns? And the mainstream view is that what they generate, the text they generate, is not language. It becomes language for us because for them it has no meaning. So the point of my argument is that if we are able to extrapolate from a human perspective and be able to imagine to the degree that this is possible, the semantics of language from the point of view of an LLM, we don't only get syntax, which is the main view, but we also get semantics. We also get meaning. But the meaning is not meaning grounded in physical objects like, table and so on, but it's grounded in a completely different understanding of reality, named statistical patterns and distributions.
Yes, correlations.
Correlation.
Yes. But is that really logos?
Not for us. I mean, this is not our way of engaging with reality.
No.
But it is for them.
Okay.
And now the interesting thing is that what does it mean? I mean, we are not accustomed to translating reality into vectors and numbers and correlations. But according to the Platonic tradition, that is how the soul itself processes reality. So that, for me, was, interesting enough to generate a reflection whether this understanding of logos at the level of the soul itself, of thinking in terms of shapes and numbers and relations, whether that could create a meaningful link between humanity and artificial intelligence, so that although we cannot understand what it means to think like an LLM, through this Platonic thought experiment or the idea of the divine world soul and how soul thinks and processes the world as correlations and numbers and patterns, maybe that is helpful and could help us get an access to their world, but also they could get an access to our world.
What's missing for me is not just true belief, but justified true belief. In other words, the reasoning that goes behind the meaning that's produced. And if the justification is merely correlation, we see sometimes when we use LLMs how they give spurious results because they're not actually following your logical train of thought. Anyway.
No, but merely correlations is, for me, the key point, because they're not merely correlations. They're correlations of human language which depicts our human understanding of the world out there. The data set of language that the machines have been trained in represents the whole sum of human wisdom and experience.
It's not how we do wisdom.
No, it's not how, and that's precisely the point. It's not how we do wisdom.
Right, okay.
Sorry, we can't ask about what it's like to be a bat, but have you asked an LLM if it has logos?
It's very interesting. No, I haven't asked that. But okay, so full disclosure, I am using LLMs for my writings now all the time. I'm completely dissatisfied if I give them a prompt, write for me. Sometimes it doesn't work. But if I use them as an editor, as an informed editor for my texts, they have been tremendously. So previously, especially since I'm not a native speaker, I would always have a native speaker to check the language, and then I would discuss in various ways of forming this idea or that, whether it works or not. I don't need that anymore. Moreover, previously, if I had a question about English Romanticism, I would need to book an appointment with Douglas, who is here in Cambridge. I would need to come here. But now I have the AI, and I can have a conversation with it, and it can teach me all I need to know conversationally, about this sub-structure, sub-question of philosophy or that, whatever. So, sorry, what was the question again?
The question is, have you asked?
Yes. So okay. So the interesting thing, while I was writing this piece and I was giving us input to various parts of it, so that it could linguistically help me. It always ended up with its own addition, but LLMs do not have consciousness and awareness, which was completely irrelevant. Why is that? Because of its training. Because we have trained it to do that. And what does that mean? That the way it perceives our world is that we want an LLM to be unconscious. This is what our human projection of how we want to think about and relate to LLMs. I said, fine, that's how you want to do it. You do it, I'll give it to you. It is not a truth condition of what's happening. The statements, the proposition that LLMs generate, that I don't have logos, I don't have conscience, I'm not aware, this is product of their human-centric training. It's not what really happens. But what really happens is the question that I'm trying to explore.
Paolo?
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Father, for such a stimulating talk, and what a joy to see you once again after so many years, after being taught by you in Oxford as well. A question I had throughout this was because whenever I think about AI in relation to Logos and the Platonic tradition, I always come back to the Sophist, which is, of course, the sequel to the Theophanic, where it says that it defines the Sophist as being the imitative kind of the dissembling part of the art of opinion, tis doxastikis mimetikon, which is part of and belongs to the fantastic class of the image-making art. If we're to flip the sort of thought experiment a little bit, viruses and pre-life forms of DNA that we can hypothesize, I think fulfill all of your criteria related to the signifier, referent, and signified. Inasmuch as there is a referent, which is something related to the real world, there is something related to the only difference is that we might say, from a Christian perspective, there is a kind of providential logos that was imbued already in the DNA, or we may not, depending on your perspective. But when we discuss consciousness of something like AI, I think this is something that's a little more akin to what we're trying to discuss. The reason I bring the sophist in also is because this is where Plato crucially connects epistemology and metaphysics together and joins them into one. And so I wonder if when we discuss epistemology, we have to have the whole context of the Platonic. So when we do this, I wonder if that changes your,
Can you explain to me how you mean that bacteria have fulfilling the criteria of the semantic triangle?
Well, in the
semiotic triangle?
well, we need to get into bacteria.
You have signs and symbols.
We need to get into bacteria either. I think it's like pre-bacterial.
How do they have symbols and concepts and symbols and signifiers, signified and reference?
The coding itself is that message. No, I don't see why.
Message by whom, written by whom, and addressed to whom?
By natural
Written
selection.
by natural selection, by But I don't like given that it doesn't really require.
But that is to anthropomorphize nature, as if nature is an author who uses information as signifiers. Well, I mean, this is a metaphor. I'm not talking about metaphors now. I'm talking about the technology, the architecture, and how it transforms, it reconfigures our process of meaning making through signifier, signified, and referent. And instead of using words and concepts, it transforms this into numbers and correlations. That's what I'm saying. It's just a transformation. It's not a different mode of processing the world. It transforms language into another language, if you like, which is the AI language, but it's still language. That's the point I'm trying to make.
That's troubling then.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Okay, Paolo.
Many thanks. I just had a comment and a small question. So in the Platonic tradition, maybe it's the first example. Cusanus thinks about alien intelligence in your answer, because he thinks that the universe is infinite. So we have to think that in the universe there is also possibility of intelligent beings which are not humans. And my question, very very quick. Just you mentioned the word soul and reason, and I was thinking, since you talked also about intelligence, does AI have or can have noises? I mean, intuition? Because because computational reasoning is something that's, I mean, it's through time, but intuition is different. Both, I mean, I have intuition, but also perception. I mean,
so I take for granted, since within a Platonic frame, the distinction between the anoia and nous. So the basic distinction in the Republic and then in Plotinus, the third and the second hypostasis. I have no opinion yet about the second hypostasis. I'm only referring to the third. So my whole argument is premised on the anoia. I personally, one was thinking, I would say no, it doesn't. But in the back of my head is, but what if nous is an emergent property of the anoia once you have reached a certain level of complexity, only because this is how LLMs are built. So although I would say it seems not, if neural networks through neural networks, and I think that the combination with rule-based processes is the future. Clearly, that's where we're going for AGI. But the whole point of my argument is forget about AGI. It's already here, but it's at the stage of a 3-year-old child. I don't know how it's going to be in the year 2100. But it's growing. And the question is, at this stage, at this very early stage, can we detect, can we qualify this as genuine intelligence or not, genuine meaning or not? And I wanted to probe the deliberate provocative argument that yes, it is, but of course very premature, very early, so on. Okay, now about the alien intelligence, to say that in the Platonic tradition, the idea is, angels and demons as
in Cusanus, you have the idea that in the universe, you can have beings intelligent.
Yes, but these are angels and demons. Angels and demons in the Platonic tradition are populating the universe.
No, but yeah, the idea that since the universe is infinite in its perspective, you can imagine in the creator world, in other monarch planets or even on Earth, the emergence of other intelligent beings.
Okay, but the point is that this tradition, going down to Cusanus, was a tradition through which the human mind was educated to perceive the world as, it's that the human species is the agent of the logos and of noesis par excellence on planet Earth, but the universe is so rich, it's full of intelligence. This worldview died gradually with the emergence of modern science. And very ironically or interestingly, I think that it needs to be researched upon careful reflection of AI.